Time for the week there was. Let's take a look at some of the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. I start here in Nigeria, and Nigeria's ruling All Progressive Congress have confirmed the resignation of its national chairman and former governor of Kano State, Umar Ganduje. In a statement late on Friday, the party said Ganduje stepped down with immediate effect to focus on urgent personal matters. His resignation address to the National Working Committee was submitted through the party's national secretary. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has since directed Deputy National Chairman North Ali Bukar Dalori to step in as acting chairman. An emergency meeting of the party's National Executive Council is expected soon to formally fill in the vacancy. APC commended Ganduje for his role in stabilizing the party, winning legal battles, and attracting opposition defections. It says it remains committed to the renewed hope agenda. All right, Kachi, I want to start off with you. Some would say this is expected. Some would say this is a massive curveball in the APC. Talk to us about this.
I don't think, I mean, you make me sound like a guest. But, you know, I think there are two important points here for me. You know, the first being the act of resigning from such a position. You know, it's not something that I would often see in our political climb. So I think that is very interesting. Just over the last couple of days, a lot of conversation on ownership and intellectual property have been within my purview. And it got me thinking, considering that I'm now in the Nigerian political conversations more frequently, that, listen, there is no political position that is anybody's intellectual property. There's no political position that is anyone's birthright. At some point, you have to step down for other people to take over. So for me, especially in the face of all the crisis going on in PDP right now, just recently we saw the former Senator Bukola Saraki on primetime discussing with Charles about the issues within the PDP, evading a lot of questions there, but also emphasizing that, listen, if they can just have their convention, if they can just, you know, put together their convention and pick their specific leaders, that a lot of things will be resolved. We're seeing Labour Party also an incredibly fractured a party with a lot of factions. And for some reason, APC seems to be the one party that seems to have everything in order. Of course, we know that there's already been a new APC chairman appointed. However, speaking now specifically to Ganduje, I think this is a time where he remains a godfather in the space of politics, and legacy, which is something I always speak about, comes into play. What is Ganduje's legacy within the Nigerian political climate going to be? One, is he going to want to run for president? And if at all he is going to want to run for president, what is going to be the premise by which Nigerians can look at him and say, this is somebody we can look forward to, we can believe? I mean, that's just an assumption. He might not, but that does not mean that his voice will not remain critical in Nigeria's political climate today. I look at several events that have shaped and I would say reformed the way the political space, specifically in Kano. I think this is a time where, in the space of the back and forth with the legal issues around the emirate, you know, we really look at Ganduje to say, what do you really think about this? How do we resolve these issues? How can we put an end to the legal disparities and the legal issues between who the emir is and who is not the emir? Because there is still a huge question mark around that issue. And we don't know how it started with the development of the new emirate, something that the new governor had to remove and reinstate Sanusi. And of course, we've seen that back and forth between Adebayero and Sanusi. Amongst this, there's several other issues that I think at this point in time, legacy demands that Ganduje not only stays and sits in the corridors of power as a godfather, but also cements his legacy by correcting a lot of the wrongs that we've seen happen. So again, like I said, political parties' positions do not remain in anybody's hands for the end of time. You know, I look forward to seeing what's next and what he comes up with. But posterity would always hold him accountable to say, with what you've done in the past, that is exactly the lens we're going to look at you to any venture you're going to go on to do in the future.
All right, Kachi, you couldn't have said it more better. Well, let's actually just touch on some key issues. Of course, controversies and also challenges actually, would I say, marred the tenure of Ganduje, former Governor Ganduje, because when you actually look at it, he took over in 2023, and ever since then, there's been a lot of back and forth, and a lot of people are not happy, but some are citing the fact that health challenges might have prompted this particular move for him to have resigned, while some are looking at it from the political lens, which actually has to be the fact that, as it stands right now, talks about will deputize the president going into the 2027 general election still is out there. And they're looking at how things will play out, and likely that particular periscope will be shifted towards the northwest. And when you look at it closely, they are looking at it and saying that maybe Governor Ganduje is probably thinking of deputizing the governor, or some are also saying that probably he's not entirely happy with how that particular zoning will take place. So we're looking forward to how things will play out on that particular front, because as it stands right now, you and I know this, when it comes to politics and when it comes to most parties, all they care about are elections and re-elections. And where the party chairmanship will be swinging to, from all indication, it might be going to the North Central. And at the moment, they are touting Governor Al-Makura of Nasarawa State as the front runner and also the preferred candidate to become the party chairman. But as we speak right now, someone is filling in their shoes, and let's see how it actually goes, if this will probably affect the build-up to 2027, because when we read that particular intro, a lot was said about how Governor Ganduje actually midwifed APC from the Buhari government into the Tinubu government, and whether or not something will be taken away from that is left to be seen. But at the moment, one thing we know is that they have a big decision to make, and we'll be keeping our eyes on the ground to see how that one plays out. But in the meantime, let's tell you that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Thursday night hosted two principal actors in the long-running political crisis, which led to the imposition of a state of emergency on Rivers State. Apparently, the meeting produced a positive outcome, given that both ministers of the Federal Capital Territory, Nyesom Wike, and his political rival, a suspended governor, Siminalayi Fubara, emerged from the session with a reconciliatory disposition, saying it was time to bury the hatchet and work for the greater good of the people. Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News, and I want to say good morning to you, Adesuwa Giwosagi. Good morning.
Good morning, Aaron. I was looking at you sitting on this table by yourself. I said, we can't let that happen. We can't let that happen. We have to join him this lovely Saturday morning.
Yes. Just before the break, we were talking about the reconciliatory meeting that happened, spearheaded by the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and bringing the warring factions in Rivers State together. And at the moment, it seems peace has been restored back to Rivers State. Kachi?
Kachi, how do you feel about the peace?
Yes, it's great to have you join us on the morning show.
It's so lovely to see you, Kachi, from Abuja.
Again, guys, I'm not a guest.
Of course.
We can all chat about this.
Of course. But you know what?
Seeing as you'd like me to...
Go ahead.
Did you want to go on?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, with regards to the peace deal, what do I say? I find the term peace deal very interesting. Because at the start of this conversation, when the state of emergency was declared, we were all led to believe that there was an emergency going on in Rivers State that affected the people. There were issues that demanded that, in a sense, democracy was put on hold. Constitutional rulership was put on hold because the people's lives and well-being were at stake. But, it's starting to look more like that was not the case, and it was just somebody's emotion, specifically Nyesom Wike's emotions that were at stake, in fact. So while I completely commend this peace deal, again, I ask, what was the reason for the state of emergency? Because I looked at that image with Siminalayi Fubara standing beside Nyesom Wike, looking completely defeated as to... He's tired. He's completely tired of the raucous, the back and forth. At the time this happened, there were so many things that came up. Some people saying this is unconstitutional, this should be challenged in the courts, this should not stand. Of course, all of those were just opinions because we saw how we are still in the state of emergency. But now it still goes back to the fact, what was the reason? If at the end of the day, Nyesom Wike came out to say, we're so happy this has happened, we've resolved the issues and it's good for everybody, we have agreed. What are we talking about? this was never about the people, So let's call it what it is. Whatever grievances were held between Nyesom Wike and Fubara was the reason for the state of emergency. Now, the question as to why the president was getting involved in this, I don't know, but I wouldn't particularly call this a peace deal. We will talk about peace deals on the show today, whether it is with Iran and the US or it's the US getting involved with issues in Africa. But when we talk about two individuals, I'm not quite sure if that suffices as a peace deal per se. But anyway, they do say it is for the betterment of the people. So I guess that state of emergency might be reversed very soon, and Fubara will return to being the governor once again, albeit for one term, or maybe this deal only involves him being a governor for a single term and not being able to rerun. I guess these technicalities will be deciphered soon enough.
All right, we are actually waiting with bated breath to see when that would actually happen, because a lot of people have criticized the state of emergency as ultra-virus, what the president actually did, very unconstitutional, and that should be the bone of contention more than any other thing, because if the president is being given the carte blanche to do what he has done without any kind of repercussion, this can spiral into probably a dark zone that we do not want to go to in our democracy. But it's unfortunate what has happened, and the winner in all of this has to be the Minister of the FCT, talking about Nyesom Wike, because he got what he wanted. He was backed by the president, and at the end of the day, with his tail between his legs, talking about Governor Siminalayi Fubara, he has come back to the negotiating table. We don't know what has been agreed, but at the moment, he seems to have gotten the shorter end of the stick, while the Minister of the FCT has finally had his way. Agreements were reached. We're not sure of what actually transpired. But clearly, this, like you said, Kachi, it has nothing to do with the people.
Definitely.
It has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the people. It's more about interest, it's more about position, and it's more about how governance will happen in Rivers State as against the interests of the people. And that is politics 101 here in Nigeria.
Definitely. For me, it's absolutely a shame. And it's very disappointing because we do have President Tinubu positioning himself as a Democrat. That is the image that he has chosen to paint himself as, a Democrat when it comes to June 12th, a fighter for democracy. However, his actions do not match his words. His actions do not match this image that he's painted of himself. And it's been reported by very reputable news organizations that part of this agreement is that Siminalayi Fubara will not be running for a second term. That is, in effect, anti-democratic. And on top of that, we also have key appointments, including the local government elections, which are slated to now hold in Rivers State, I believe, in October. Again, if the governor is said to be cut at his knees, as a lot of people have called it, in this undemocratic manner, I said it's unbehooving, I believe, of a president who has painted himself as not only a Democrat but a fighter for democracy across Nigeria, to be the person to carry out such an action in Rivers State. Of course, we have seen the head of Rivers State, now the administrator of Rivers State, pass his budget through the National Assembly, and we've seen appointments being made, and a lot of these appointments are not just people who are not within the party of Siminalayi Fubara, which is the PDP, but also not indigents of Rivers State itself. So I find this very shocking coming from President Tinubu, who sees himself as a Democrat and also sells himself as a Democrat and a fighter for democracy to the Nigerian people.
All right, let's still move it on.
Adesuwa, I think we've just before we move on, Aaron, what Adesuwa just said right now is so key, anti-democratic. And I just needed to be completely certain that I heard correctly, with regards to him only being able to run for one term. Again, how does this add up, to the initial reasons that were given for the state of emergency? And I hope the Nigerians can really x-ray these issues to see correctly that it was never about the people. It was never about whatever security issues existed in Rivers State at the time. In all of this, as much as I think the people of Rivers State are truly the victim, again, Fubara is also a victim in this situation, because every governor that's going to come after him understands the order, especially looking forward to the next elections with regards to River State. You have to understand that there is a way things go, and this is how it is going to be. So there's certain issues that will never come up again, and I think that's very sad for our democracy.
Definitely, but I believe they might come up very soon if Similai Fubara does decamp to the APC.
That's something to look out for.
Yes.
And I must also say that a lot of people believed that Similai Fubara should have taken the high road, because whatever the optics that actually have come up from this particular negotiation and this peace deal reeks of desperation from the part of Similai Fubara, that he's desperate enough to remain as governor rather than probably cloak himself with honor and dignity and probably decide that I will not be having any of this, I will not be rubbished, and I will decide to walk. But it is what it is. To each his own. Now, moving away from that, now a new tax regime is upon Nigeria, effective the 1st of January 2026, as President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has assented to the 4 tax reform bills passed by the National Assembly. The administration said that this was necessary because existing tax laws are outdated and disproportionately impact the poor. Our Rise Business correspondent Rotu Sodiri sent in the summary of the highlights of the new act.
President Bola Tinubu has assented to the 4 tax reform acts recently passed by the National Assembly. The acts are Nigeria Tax Administration Bill, Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill, and the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill. In his address to reporters, the chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service, Zach Adedeji, said the following: "It takes time for all the stakeholders, participants, operators, and the regulator to change the system. So, with the magnanimity of the National Assembly, Mr. President assented to the bills. So the effective date will be January the 1st of 2026. We have 6 full months for both sensitization and planning. This is also considering the fiscal year of the government, because when you have this kind of change, it's not what you do in the media." Here's what we know about the key reforms in the bills. For the Nigeria Tax Act, it swaps multiple rules into a single tax code. It also eliminates smaller overlapping taxes. For reforms in the Tax Administration Act, common rules are now set for tax collection, and that's across federal, state, and local governments. For the reforms in the Revenue Service Act, the Federal Inland Revenue Service has now been replaced with a new body, the Nigeria Revenue Service, the NRS. As for the reforms in the Joint Revenue Board Act, it creates a tax ombudsman and a new tax tribunal to resolve disputes. So what are the intended benefits for these reforms? It's supposed to be felt mostly by low-income earners. Those earning ₦1 million or less get 200,000 naira rent relief. There's a VAT exemption on food, healthcare, education, and rent. SMEs who earn below 50 million naira in turnover per year are exempted from company income tax. And for larger companies, the company income tax of 30% is supposed to be gradually reduced to 25% over a number of years. By making the tax code easier to digest, the Tinubu administration hopes it can increase tax compliance and raise the nation's tax-to-GDP ratio, currently just over 10%, to 18% by 2026. All eyes on fiscal year 2026. For Arise News, Rhoda Sudiri.
New tax law. Let's see how it goes. Okay, Kachi.
Yes, I mean, the new Nigerian tax bill faces several criticisms already. We know this. The event happened, if I'm not mistaken, earlier this week here in the FCT. And there's several concerns about this new bill's potential impact, specifically on small and medium enterprises. You know, there's also the distribution of VAT revenue among the states, something that they may not be able to meet up. The overall fairness and effectiveness as well of the tax system. Now, there needs to be an understanding for transparency with regards to the effectiveness of the tax system. A lot of criticisms have come from the fact that there might not even be effective transparency and oversight, that's the word, with regards to how this is managed, overzealousness as well of the tax authorities. Now, the bill's provisions could also place a higher tax burden on small professional service companies, potentially discouraging new businesses from formal resignation, which will be a problem. So the formula for distributing VAT revenue as well is based on consumption rather than production, sparking a lot of controversy. States, especially in the northern region, they're really scared. They feel that they might receive a smaller share of the VAT revenue, which can now exacerbate regional economic disparities as well. So there's such a need for an improved tax administration and enforcement to ensure these reforms achieve their intended goals. And I think a general understanding and awareness of what the provisions of these tax bills are. What people need to understand is, as much as tax is entrenched in the line of business, this is why having legal representatives are so important, to understand what the tax laws are and to make sure that you do not fall out of line with them. So you don't have somebody show up one day and then you're wondering, how do I owe this much? So I think it's important for every single Nigerian to understand what these different bills, I believe there were about 4 of them, what they say and how they affect the average Nigerian.
Definitely. Now, I think I have to disagree with you, Kachi. I believe at this point the onus is on the Nigerian citizen to know what these tax laws say, because particularly these tax laws were fought on every single step of the way, and the head of the FRS, now the Nigerian Revenue Service, Dr. Adedeji, had to speak with the governors. He went to the Governors Forum. He went to the National Assembly. We had public hearings on these tax laws. Very importantly, the VAT was not increased to 12.5% from 7.5%, which is what it is going to remain as. Also, very importantly, in these tax bills, people who earn under certain amounts are not going to have to pay income tax. Now, these taxes that were seen as regressive in the past, particularly increasing the burden of the poorest end of Nigerian society, have now been removed. These tax laws, we have to be honest, are going to modernize Nigeria's tax regime system. I have to say that this is something that should be lauded on the part of the Bola Tinubu administration, that they were able to accomplish this also in a shorter timeline that was previously seen possible. You know, we have seen some of the Bola Tinubu supporters on the internet and on TV compared to the PIA in terms of timeline. To do something this extensive in terms of our tax regime, I think we have to laud Dr. Adedeji, who really went to the states, the state governors, who came to the National Assembly and explained the different aspects of this tax law and explained the different aspects of this regime. At this stage, if somebody does not understand what their burden is under the different laws, it's something that has to do with articulation and it has to do with public campaigns. But on the part of the people who came out and put this tax law together, I think this is something that has to be lauded. And I think this is something that's very important. Now, what comes after this is what Nigerians are asking. Are we going to see that after we pay these taxes, after our regime is modernized, after we remove these excesses and maybe remove the inefficiencies from the system, are we going to see the product of us paying tax? Are we going to see it in infrastructure and education? Now, that is what remains to be seen. But when it comes to this tax regime in particular, when it comes to these laws, I think this is something that should be lauded.
All right, I must concur with that, because the truth is this: let's move away from the academic side of it, because when you look at Section 202 of that particular act, it says that it actually takes precedence over previous ones in time past, about 11 of them. So as it stands right now, the most important thing for Nigerians and the biggest takeaway is the fact that it removes the financial burden on low-income households, which is key. Kashi, you mentioned the value-added tax. I'm very excited about that, because when I go to restaurants, I always feel like it's a rock pool that I'm being asked to pay value-added tax on consumables. That will not be happening, not immediately, of course. We'll have to wait till another 6 months when it actually kicks in to be able to see that one happen, which is actually very interesting to me. And like you pointed out, people who earn from 800,000 naira and below will not have to be taxed. That is huge. The fact that at the moment it is protecting and giving some kind of tax rebate to low-income households, it's a massive breather, I must actually say. But that's on the short term. On the long term, like you have also mentioned, it has to be, what will we do with this tax? Because the question has always been, do we see the effect of taxes being paid by Nigerians? The truth is this: there are a lot of tax gaps and a lot of tax vagues as it stands. Places that I must actually say that people are not usually paying tax, so we do not actually see the benefit of tax being put to good use. But the most important thing is that as it stands right now, the low-income households have been protected, and more importantly, for a brief period on consumables, Nigerians can heave a sigh of relief.
Yeah, I mean, that 7.5, I'm sure, you know,
Yes.
lots of people wish it was 0, but we still have to pay the 7.5%
No, but the fact
on
that,
VAT.
that it will not apply on consumables, it's massive for me.
Definitely. You know, I think it's very important
Aaron,
also that we talk
yeah.
about the fact that this tax system has simplified what we had in the past.
True.
That we've brought a lot of convoluted things together, and sometimes it shows you that Nigeria's history as a former colony of the British, us just creating laws as we go along, sometimes is not the best way to go about things. And this tax regime, this new tax law shows that you can course correct what was done in the past. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Now let's move on to our next story, and we're going to speak about
I was just
Africa
going to
here.
on something that Aaron
Uganda's
said.
President Yoweri Museveni will seek re-election in next year's general elections, aiming to extend his nearly 40-year rule. A senior official from the ruling National Resistance Movement confirmed that Museveni will collect nomination forms on the 28th of June to contest both the party chairmanship and the presidential ticket. The 80-year-old leader in power since 1986 is one of Africa's longest-serving presidents. Uganda's constitution has been amended twice to allow him to run again. Museveni is expected to face a renewed challenge from opposition leader Bobby Wine, who came second in 2021. Wine alleges that vote rigging and military intimidation robbed him of his victory in that election. Now, that is absolutely no surprise coming out of Uganda from Museveni. And Museveni is not alone, because even just closer to us in Togo, Nasingbe's, changing of the Togolese constitution led to riots and protests earlier this week. Now, Uganda and Togo are also just not alone in this fight against democracy. And sometimes you actually have to see Nigeria as a jewel in the rough when it comes to our unbroken years of democracy and the fact that we have had leaders change multiple times. Now, in Togo, of course, Nasingbe took over from his father. His family has led Togo for 57 years. And also, very interestingly, Uganda, Museveni's son, has been tweeting about Nigeria. He said he would like to come and fight Boko Haram, saying that because of the women of Nigeria and what he's heard about them, saying it in words that I definitely cannot say on air. And what is very distressing about this is that there have been accusations that Museveni, Uganda, and their forces have used violence against women as a tool of war and as a tool of control in Uganda. When we see these leaders continue to change constitutions, because he's not the only one. We've had 10 successful coups in Africa over the last 10, 15 years. We've also had multiple people change the constitution so they can extend their stay in power across Africa, even in Burundi, even in Togo, even in Uganda, as we're speaking about, even in Rwanda. When we have these leaders change the constitution, depress the people's voice, and use different tools of violence to oppress their people, we see riots like we saw in Kenya. And I really wonder if those riots don't send a message to African leaders who feel that power is the most important thing that they can have, rather than protecting their people, protecting their countries, and protecting its institutions as they met it. Aaron?
As they message, I couldn't agree more with you. And just two issues I was just going to say about the other story, just before I touch on this, that with the rate of inflation, the standard of living, the barest minimum in terms of how much people earn, I don't think 800,000 naira, with regards to what's the cap for people who pay taxes or not, is an amount of money that any Nigerian looks forward to earning at this point in time. I believe that a lot of businesses are well over that cap, which is why the criticisms persist. But now, speaking about this issue with Yoweri Museveni, with the elections drawing very near, the mood is increasingly tense, very, very tense. We know that the United Nations and right groups have also voiced major concern, because in mid-June, President Yoweri Museveni signed into law a bill that allows civilians to be tried in military courts. Now, another opposition figure, Kizza Besigye, is currently facing a possible death sentence after being charged with treason in a court-martial. Now, this man is 80. He's, like you rightly said, Adesuwa, he's ruled Uganda since 1986. And for a time, it looks like, you know, he might even be grooming the son that you just spoke about, Muhuzi, if I'm not mistaken, as his successor. But now we all know that he's not a favorite with the public. You know, he has a lot of outbursts. That's what I call them. A lot of online outbursts on social media. We also know that there is still Bobby Wine, who has been through so much, but is saying that, listen, regardless of the fact that he's been placed on multiple arrests and his head of security at some point was abducted, he's still looking forward to actually running as well. So I think the next elections will be explosive. That's what I would describe it as. But it is, in a way, kind of makes me feel better about our situation in Nigeria, if I'm being very honest. Because, I mean, how does this happen? How do you alter the constitution to fit your personal desires and your personal needs? This is, I mean, I have to just... It's impossible. We are complaining about Rivers State, a state of emergency. This is something that's been going on for 37 years in Uganda. And the people cannot do anything about it. And if they do, just like we've seen with the man facing the death sentence, the constitution can be amended to silence you. Now we can't even talk about rule of law. It's dead there. It doesn't exist.
Definitely. Now, I want to know what Aaron has to say, because, you know, we're talking about these years in Uganda, but we've also seen the same thing in Equatorial Guinea with Nguema. And it seems that Ouattara might be, you know, gearing up for similar in the Ivory Coast, so even closer to us here. So, Aaron, how do you feel about this story? How do you feel about Museveni still ruling?
No, a little bit to make it quick. When you said he's not the longest serving, that is very distressful, I must actually say, because you've mentioned Equatorial Guinea in Basongo and the fact that he's been there for about 45 years right now.
Nguema, yes.
Yes, that's very distasteful. That is monarchy probably being paraded and masqueraded as democracy. The truth is this, ask yourself, why is Africa where it is? And the fact that we've not been able to step into the light. It's all because of this. Because when you have leaders and when you have democratically elected leaders choose to stay there for as long as they live. Paul Biya is a typical example when you look at that, and it's a classical case here. Why should you do that? At the detriment of the people, because you do not care about the people. All you care about is just to hold on to power for as long as you can, and when you're exiting the door, you now decide to bring in probably your son or a relative to take over power. The truth is this, the reason why we are still where we are as a collective when we talk about Africa is because our democracy is a charade. It is monarchy best masquerading as democracy. Well, let's actually move on for the brevity of time, and that's all we can take on the week that was.